I have been asked to talk about Juneteenth, the federal holiday that is celebrated annually here in the United States. Being a children's author, I'm happy to say that one of my published books, entitled Juneteenth Celebrating Freedom, it talks about Juneteenth, on how it originated, and its history, and some of the way we celebrate it across our rich country. But before I do that, allow me to read from my other latest book, In Our History, a time before Juneteenth where our ancestors were brought as slaves to the shores of this country, the Civil War, and the things that led up to the celebration of Juneteenth. So without further ado, let's talk about Juneteenth. From the mighty continent of Africa, where kings and queens were sculpted out of pillars of stone, where we are found in the biblical book with conversations that were held with King Solomon, and those asking to be baptized before returning back to Ethiopia, where Masai dressed in tribal wear and shepherds watched their flocks across the fields of earthly grass and maidens in their smocks, where ancient stories told of old by elders and griots to sons, daughters, and families, their customs they were taught. Though enriched in knowledge and cultural history, they did not know what was to come and future did not see. Across the spacious waters, many ships approach to enslave many people, chained, caged, and poached. They took them from their homes, from shores of golden sand, across the mighty waters to a far and distant land. Beginning in the 16th century, Spanish, Portuguese, French, and Dutch traders systematically purchased large numbers of African people, many of whom had been captured by traders, African allies, in wars. They raided many of the West African coasts. The captured most Africans were put in inhumane ports, marched up and down the coast, shackled to one another, put on ships that transported them across the Atlantic Ocean. This, which is called the Middle Passage, was the dangerous and horrific voyage from Africa to the Americas. About 10% of the African slaves died. Once arriving, slaves were sold at public auctions or directly to plantation owners, sometimes through specialized slave traders. African slaves on plantations were forced to perform hard work, physical labor, working long hours in harsh conditions under the supervision of overseers. Their labor, mostly focused on cultivating crops such as cotton, tobacco, sugarcane, rice, with tasks including clearing land, planting and weeding, harvesting, working long hours with little rest, facing brutal punishment if they did not do what was required. They were considered property and they had no rights or control over their work conditions. The war between the states began primarily due to the growing tensions between the northern and southern states over slavery. The southern states wanting to keep the institution of slavery and the northern states wanting to abolish it. Not only that, disagreements about the state rights and the power of the federal government and the succession of the southern states. The North was becoming more industrial, while the South was more agricultural. Another reason was the southern states wanted to expand into western territories, while the North wanted to keep it open to white labor alone. The election of Abraham Lincoln as president in 1860 was a clear signal to the South that the conversation of their direction of slavery was not what they wanted, so they decided to secede from the Union, a political decision that led to war. The southern states lost primarily due to the North's superior industrial capability, larger population and naval blockade, which hampered the economy of the South. It took away their ability to resupply their troops, along with divisions within themselves. Their disappointment and argument with state rights and federal government. On April 9th, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered his army to Union General Ulysses A.S. Grant, precipitating the encapsulation of the Confederate forces. However, the subsequent period, as known as the Reconstruction, saw Southern states re-enter the Union with many of their structures intact, and the implementation of laws, policies that perpetuated the racial discrimination and other bylaws. The Emancipation Proclamation issued on January 1st, 1863, which declared more than 3 million enslaved people living in the Confederate States to be free. More than 2 years would pass before the news reached African Americans living in Texas. On June 19th, 1865, in Galveston, Texas, our ancestors celebrated the delayed communication of the end of the Civil War and the enforcement of the Emancipation Proclamation. This renowned celebration became known as Juneteenth, the oldest known celebration for the ending of slavery. Since this spontaneous celebration, the Juneteenth holiday has spread across the country by many African American families. Although Juneteenth is a time for celebration, it is also a time to honor and give patronage to our ancestors and the struggles of African American slaves during this difficult and challenging time. It will never be known how many teachers, artists, and doctors were lost during this time period. It is vitally important to recognize and remember the Juneteenth holiday and to ensure that history does not repeat itself and future generations continue to work together to ensure a brighter tomorrow. In different cities across our nation, Juneteenth is celebrated in many ways. We celebrate by reading General Order Number 3, the proclamation that declared that all slaves to be free. We celebrate with singing and with spiritual songs, giving praise unto the Lord who brought us all along. We play baseball and horseshoes and sack races too, and couples play cakewalk, just to name a few. Although Juneteenth is a time for celebration, it is also to remind ourselves of the struggles of the African slaves and the difficult, challenging time in our history. Let us begin to be in touch with one another, for we are in the Lord's hand when we continually celebrate the holiday of Juneteenth, telling our stories to our children and families alike. For we have come this far by faith.